suburban living is the finest thing that ever happened to us.
I would never move back to the city. We love it.
I buy a house. First thing I gotta do is put in grass, and trees even. That's okay, but then what? Sewers, $15 million worth. Overnight, there ain't room in the schools for all the kids. Expand them, more money. The streets crack up, and I gotta pay for them. We gotta have parks, they say. And who puts up the dough? Me. I buy a house, and first thing you know, I gotta buy a whole damn town.
I don't miss the city in the slightest.
The only thing I really miss is a broom closet.
Well, I'm from a small town originally, and I like small towns. And this is a good town to live in.
Back in 1930, E.B. White described the suburbanite as a man who shaves and runs to catch a train and races back to shave again. Well, that was 30-odd years ago. And the main difference today is that a lot more men are shaving and running for trains, buses, carpools, even airplanes. Today, over half of America's wage earners live outside the municipality where they work, a large share of them now traveling in their own cars. So getting to the job and back home again can be the hardest work a lot of us do all day, and often the most exciting. There are, of course, occasional pauses in this headlong dash from the city, but few commuters find them refreshing. It seems that he who blocks traffic commits the 20th century's one unforgivable sin. A small one-family house surrounded by dozens, if not hundreds, of others is what most commuters find at the end of their trek. Mortgage Manor, they call it, and laugh at themselves. Yet, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, this land of do-it-yourself domesticity can seem as snug and cozy as a fur-lined foxhole. The petty competitiveness of life in suburbia has become a stock American joke, as well as the raw material for a lot of heady sociological tomes. But the hard fact is that this way of life now represents the ambitions of a majority of the American people. What the average urban American thinks he wants is spelled out in bold letters along every highway that takes him away from the city. What he gets, once he's made that down payment and signed all those papers, is often less clearly defined. The social satirist Robert Osborne cartoons the suburban dilemma in this fashion.
Once upon a time, there was a little man, his name doesn't matter, who found himself on life's treadmill, going nowhere fast. He felt lost in the very bigness of things. He was frightened, bewildered. So what did he do? He found an escape, the way most of us do, to a place called our own, full of wall-to-wall comfort. Or was it wall-to-wall fear? As I say, the man's name doesn't matter, but his story's our own.
To examine this suburban dilemma, we've taken our cameras to Wheeling, Illinois, a village 30 miles north and west of Chicago's Loop. Wheeling is as old as Chicago itself, but as late as 1945, its population was only 450. Then one day it awakened to realize that it could no longer continue as a pleasant little village. The city of Chicago was reaching out to embrace it. Wheeling's rich and well-drained farmland had another destiny, a destiny most of its large landowners seemed all too willing to encourage. By 1955, Wheeling had doubled its population to 950. Today, its population approaches 14,000, and it will not stop there. In fact, Wheeling is earmarked to have a population of 114,000 come the explosion. Northwestern University's Center for Metropolitan Studies has watched Wheeling's growth with interest. Its director, Dr. Scott Greer, explains why.
Our interest in Wheeling comes naturally. It is a part of the metropolitan area that is our home. But more than this, we're interested in suburbs in general. They are a very important part of what is happening to the people of the United States. Our suburbs are the result of our increasing freedom of choice. The average American citizen, because of the automobile, has much more freedom of spatial location than was ever true before. At the same time, our increasing wealth and increasing average incomes makes possible more choice for us, and furthermore, our general assistance from the federal government through the FHA and the VA programs allows us to purchase new homes on the periphery. To many people, this may seem like the desecration of aesthetic values, the destruction of fruitful farmland, and they talk rather wildly about standing room only. However, let us remember that half of our population lives in 1% of the land area, and that in our metropolitan areas today, over half of the people live in suburbia. Suburbs are not new. They are not discrete, concrete areas, alien to our tradition, outside the mainstream of our life. They are not some sort of inhuman dragon which is going to devour our cities. The history of America, urban America, has been a history of growth, and it's been a growth of residential areas on the outskirts of the city. In other words, of suburbs. Here is a map of the Chicago metropolitan area in which we can see this process of growth. Here, for instance, is the city in 1860, a very tiny area. Here's the city in 1900, much more substantial area. Here is the city as it was in 1930, and you can see that the automobile has already affected a fanning out of population. Here we are in 1960. The recent mass movement to the suburbs has been startling because it has been so sudden and because it has been so visible. Anyone can go and see miles and miles of tract development.
Yet each look-alike house in these sprawling new tracts soon becomes the all-consuming concern of one family. This process of turning what was once just a number on a real estate map into a place called our own is sometimes painful, but it can be exciting as well. It's a challenge that fosters a pioneering spirit as ardent as any in history. Pride of ownership is a tremendous incentive no matter what the obstacles.
Statistics are plentifully available, and they can tell a pretty depressing story. One age group, one occupational group, one educational level, one income level. This can look like the image of the masked man. Based on this sort of an examination, Wheeling is a population of young parents and their children. 8 out of 10 people or young adults or children, and usually pretty young children. Few families have over $7,500 a year income. This is about the average. Few people have more than a high school education. While they're more educated than the average for the United States, it is a sameness of level at about high school graduate level. Most people are blue-collar workers. They work with their hands.
When you ask people why they left the city for Wheeling, they'll usually tell you, we moved for the sake of the children. Yet, as you hear them describe their own lives, you realize they, too, are looking for something our mass-produced urban society denies them. What bit of our own can anyone claim in the machines of production where most of them work? What chance is there to leave a truly personal imprint on the fruits of one's labor? When your job is to keep the wheels going, no matter what, no matter why, the desire to escape each night to a place where you can do as you please can be overwhelming. Seen against a background like this, the promises a small town such as Wheeling holds out to refugees from the city must be tempting indeed. But what of the claims that life in the suburbs is, in the end, quite as intolerably monotonous as life on the job? We asked a lot of people in Wheeling to tell us their stories, which became almost one story before they were through, a tale of escape and entrapment that went something like this. It begins on a day full of sun, usually a weekend in spring. Back in the city, the wind blew soot in your face. Out here, it smells sweet. A fine day for dreaming. A fine day for selling houses.
The minute I walked in, I decided this was it. This was the house we wanted. I could just see my children running around their planter box. All I would have to do was peek out of the kitchen and I could see them, wherever they were in the house. Immediately, we both liked the house very much, and dollar for dollar, we thought it was a square deal.
Many families also come to the suburbs because it's going to be cheaper than living in town, or they think it will be when they first sign the papers. Monthly payments are often less than the rent you'd pay for this much floor space in town. Add low down payments, 30 years to pay for a brand new house. Who can resist? So they buy and move in, many experiencing home ownership for the first time. Planting is often done with more optimism than skill. But a garden of their own is something they've wanted, and it's one of the first things they get to work on. Then come the surprises. Is it too much rain or too little? A backyard that was to be so lovely for the children becomes a mud trap or a dust bowl that must be seeded with grass at more dollars per square yard than you ever dreamed grass could possibly cost. It's always hard work starting a garden from scratch. Do it once and you'll never again take grass and shrubbery for granted. Of course, if a chance to garden is one of the reasons you move to the suburbs, you're less likely to resent all the time and money this kind of thing takes. And as the bills mount up, you keep comforting yourself with the thought that you must be adding hundreds of dollars to your property's resale value. What you aren't prepared for is being involved financially in big public improvements like sewer systems. In Wheeling, the deep tile drainage system that had worked so well when the area was farmland had been crushed by the developers' bulldozers. Designers of their storm sewers failed to take this into account, so a new $15 million installation had to be built, paid for, of course, with higher taxes on the new residents. This unexpected burden would not have fallen on them in the city, and many of the new suburbanites were badly shaken.
To a lot of us, the tax bill came quite as a surprise. We were used to renting, and I guess we thought the tax bills were only for landlords. The builder told us our taxes would only be $300, not $512. Some of us were worse off. Just because we had an extra bedroom and a basement, our tax bill was $655.
It makes it sort of fun, if you can call it that. We're all in the big mortgage thing and big tax thing. And when everybody's in the same boat, you don't feel so bad.
As Wheeling grew and grew and grew, from a village into a town and then into a small metropolis, some of the more serious problems its citizens fled the city to escape have begun to crop up. Here's one example. Designers of the attractive school buildings overlooked what was to be Wheeling's badge of distinction, the highest fertility rate in the state of Illinois. Throughout suburbia, the number of couples of childbearing age is disproportionately large. Good public schools are what they want most. But the sheer numbers now puts such a strain on most systems that the quality of education they once offered is threatened. Parents who moved from the city to avoid the expense of sending their children to private schools often face this choice again in the suburbs, despite the high school taxes they pay. Parks and playgrounds are also in short supply in suburbia.
The whole Wheeling area is neglected when it comes to parks. In our subdivision, there is no place to play ball, and you can't have a good game of ball on a narrow street. One of my neighbors counted up 45 children in our block, and the biggest form of activity here is riding a bike. And after a while, you can get pretty tired of riding a bike.
Another legitimate public expense, and also another reason why taxes in suburbia keep going up and up and up.
Yes, we did. Terrible. But I think anytime you move into a new area, don't you think that it has to be higher with all the children? Well, I don't mind being a pioneer. I'm not one about this thing. I mean, the builder estimated at $250, $300. And, I mean, not to have even any warning of what was to be when you get your first full bill. This is what really upsets me. It's twice the amount.
It's no wonder certain social patterns develop in suburbia. Patterns between neighbor and neighbor, to the cafe clatch, to the larger informal gathering under a variety of labels, and always the subject of conversation is the same, the community and its problems. And the problems are the same, the need for new and different services, and the question of who shall pay and how much.
It was going to be cheaper living out here in the suburbs, they thought. Why didn't anyone warn them what they were in for? The salesman didn't mention the cost of repairs or the cost of the garden or the cost of commuting or even the cost of selling and getting the heck out. The pressures are too much for a few, and they decamp in the night. For sale signs threaten to become a permanent part of the landscape. For who's going to buy a second-hand house when he can get a new one for nothing down? But most of Wheeling's families stay on, grinning and bearing it, burying themselves, perhaps, in their fur-lined foxholes. And some decide to do something about it all, to pitch in and work for the community, even if it means personal sacrifices.
Edgar Hintz and his wife have lived in Wheeling for 3 years. He is also past president of the Homeowners Association, and he is one of the citizens very active on the Citizens Committee for the School Board.
When people in the community find out that you're interested in the community, boy, you're up for everything. This place developed pretty helter-skelter. The first year, it was do what you had to do to get it done. But I think we're on top of it now.
Mrs. Hintz is president of the Garden Club. It's an unusual one, for its members are not merely concerned with their private gardens, but with making the community beautiful.
We're not so much concerned with growing rare iris as we are with eliminating bare and untended areas. The plan for Wheeling includes a community appearance program, and we're going to try to extend our landscaping efforts and put in more trees. One day we'll have an established look. You wait and see.
With this kind of concern, what begins as just one more tract development can become a genuine community. Paul Christensen has lived in Wheeling for several years. He works for an electronics manufacturer nearby and is particularly interested in the industrial development of the area.
Light industry is also moving out into the suburban areas. We need this sort of thing to help alleviate taxes, certain unemployment problems, although I don't think that this is going to help us in the taxes, even though the village or the town itself has set aside certain land areas for this type of development.
As a matter of fact, the list of tenants in Wheeling's industrial park is already impressive. Mrs. Christensen has never been one to hang back when there was a community job to be done. She's one of a handful who brought to completion a community swimming pool.
Coming from the city, it was very hard for me to realize that a group of citizens could get together and form a pool such as this, a swimming pool all by themselves with no help from anyone. And we have just completed our first full year of operation. We've paid interest off on our bonds, and we're anticipating a very successful season next year. It's something that I think took a lot of courage on the part of the people that were part of this, and it's something that we are quite proud of.
Eventually, most suburbanites who stick and get involved in the work become unabashed town boosters.
When we drove back from a vacation in the east this summer, I found that I was quite proud of where I lived. I could look at it as a visitor might for the first time. I found myself thinking, gee, the trees are really getting big, and how pretty it looks.
Mrs. Christensen is also Park Board Commissioner and is currently at work to achieve a park for Wheeling. Her predecessor was Mike Dunzella, teacher of retarded children. He typifies those many professional people who not only live in suburbia, but give up large blocks of their time to help with its problems of government.
I was particularly glad to see that the plan for Wheeling encouraged the continuance of an activity which we started some time back. Since we had no large public open land that we could use for parks or recreation, we began to make extensive use of the schools and the school grounds for recreational purposes. During the winter, we used some of the classrooms for our arts and crafts program. Other groups have been using the schools also, the scouts, government bodies, and so on for educational purposes as well. I would hope that the joint use of educational facilities by groups like that would be encouraged everywhere.
In most suburbs, you will find natural leaders, people with a strong community sense who enjoy the feeling of real achievement that this kind of activity brings. They have to make certain personal sacrifices, of course.
But the sacrifices are also challenges to the Native American ingenuity for voluntary organization. As a consequence of this, Wheeling has dozens of voluntary organizations, civic groups, homeowners associations, the PTA, the Brownies, the Boy Scouts. This may sound trivial, but what is trivial about concern for the future of children and for the family home? These voluntary organizations serve another important purpose. They generate and mobilize public. For years now, every slate of candidates for office in Wheeling carries in its platform a commitment to civic planning. It is quite remarkable that a town this young, with relatively low income, should have a plan commission and a professional planner on its staff. The federal government has helped out with an urban planning assistance grant to Wheeling. Already, 7 preliminary groups published. These cover social and economic population characteristics, housing and homes, commercial development, industrial development, schools, community facilities, and future land use. And now Wheeling is ready to go into the second stage, the gaining of public acceptance and support for its planning activities.
The mere fact of having a planner in Wheeling isn't going to solve our problems either. There are a lot of people in this community who are great moaners, but there are very few who really want to pitch in and do some work. If you're going to have a planner and have it succeed, you've got to develop pride in the community. Planning must spring from the people. So our work is pretty well cut out for us. If we're to get this community developed the way it should develop, we've got to develop more civic pride and get the people in on the act so they can really pitch in and do a job.
There are lots of problems ahead for Wheeling, problems that won't be easy to solve. But as Edgar Hintz says, Wheeling is getting on top of them now. And the citizens who are pitching in to solve them are finding that getting out of their fur-lined foxholes can make living in suburbia worthwhile.
You only get out of a community what you're really willing to put into it. And I guess on that score, I'm really in debt because people out here have been awfully nice. During my third pregnancy, I had a very hard time and spent almost 5 months in bed. I couldn't take care of the children, or I couldn't take care of the house or look after the meals. So there were 4 families out here that just literally moved in and took over. After they got their own children off to school in the morning, they came over, fed mine, took over the house, made beds, and made meals. They even made hot meals, and Ed had a hot dinner when he came home from work, and they brought me my lunch during the day. They did all this work without any question of what we owed them. But when Nancy was born, she belonged to all the families, not just us. We lived in the apartment in the city for 3 years, and I could have died in that apartment, and our neighbors would never have known the difference.
It wasn't like this in the city. On Saturdays, when you did the shopping, first of all, you had to walk up about 3 flights of stairs, kid under each arm, hauling the damn groceries practically over your back, and then up into the house. Now, it's a small thing, I'm sure, but those are the things that made the difference for us out here.
When we lived in an apartment in the city, we had a piano. I could never play the thing because it seemed to bother the neighbors. But 2 or 3 weeks after we got settled out here, Ed and I went into the living room one night, about 10 o'clock, and I played the piano and he sang. I said to Ed, I don't know what sacrifices are going to come with this house, but when you can do what you want to, when you want to do it, even your laundry, I said, this is just tremendous.
So there you are. They thought they were buying a house and they ended up paying for a town. Some of them may have thought they were crawling into a fur-lined foxhole, but circumstances forced them beyond the edge of their patch of lawn. We sociologists know all about the problems of suburbia. Many of us live there. But is it possible that we are, like Lot's wife, so busy looking over our shoulder at the good of the old central city that we miss the implication of towns like Wheeling for human development, maturity, and perhaps the embellishment of life?
This is NET, National Educational Television.